Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a rather chilling collection of scary stories that happened while urban exploring. I would also like to wish a very happy belated birthday to Tabitha. It was yesterday, I'm sorry I didn't get to publish this video then, and I will give a longer explanation as to why that happened at the end of the video. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I've been into photography and urban exploration for years. I love capturing those moments where nature and time reclaim human spaces. Most of the time I explore in the warmer months, but this trip was different. There's this old steel factory not far from where I live, and most people in the Urbex community nearby have been there a few times at least. It's a really large looming structure that you can spot from the road, like a rusted skeleton of an empire that outlived its usefulness. Or at least it was. It's since been demolished, and I think there's a housing project being planned for that area, but that's besides the point. I'd been inside it once in the summer, and even then it was unnerving. The ceilings stretched up forever, swallowing the light, and it stank of rust and stagnant water and mold. Jesus, it's a real combination that's like a punch in the nose. There was also machinery the size of houses still inside, coated in orange and brown corrosion. But in the winter, no one bothers going in. There's ice, snow coming in. It's a hazard, and as a building that could have caved in on itself at any moment, most people thought it was just stupid to venture in. But I, of course, was that stupid. And in a way that was the appeal. Snow drifting through collapsed roof sections, ice covering puddles like glass. It's a sort of beauty that only exists for a few weeks a year, seen by hardly anyone. And I wanted to capture that with long exposures, eerie light paintings, maybe even some shots of snowflakes drifting across the broken machinery. So, on a night when the forecast promised temperatures well below -20 Celsius, I packed my gear, tripod, DSLR, a powerful flashlight, extra batteries, thick gloves, and loaded everything into my vehicle, cranked the heat, and drove out through the empty highways. The closer I got, the more the factory came into view. Even from a distance, it looked less like a building and more like a fortress. I parked in the shadow of an old loading bay, killed the lights, and sat there for a moment. The air outside was sharp enough to sting inside my nose, so I pulled my scarf over my mouth, slung my gear over my shoulder, and stepped out. Every step making a quiet thud in the snow. The entrance was the same broken side door I'd used last summer. Snow piled against it, but I shoved it open and ducked inside. The difference was immediate. The air inside somehow colder, carrying the stink of decades-old rusts and wet rot. My flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the dark, illuminating drifting snowflakes that had slipped through cracks in the roof. The sound of my boots echoed across the cavernous interior, crunching over broken glass, scattered bolts and ice. It was incredibly quiet, and perfect, really. Every little sound, creak of metal, drip of water, the hollow thud of something shifting far away was amplified in the silence. I started exploring slowly. I stopped to shoot long exposures of collapsed staircases, light painting across rusted gear the size of cars, and I played with shadows thrown by broken support beams. It was honestly everything I'd hoped for. But after an hour, I wanted something more dramatic. That's when I remembered the catwalks. There are suspended walkways bolted to the factory walls, narrow strips of grated metal that hang 20 to 30 feet above the floor. They snake across the space like arteries, and in the summer, I'd walked one for fun, testing my nerves. It wobbled, but held, and the other people I'd spoken to said they'd been on it loads of times and that it was sturdy. But now in the dark of winter, they looked like fragile veins of rust, dangling in a frozen tomb, nothing stronger than a spider web. Still, the photographer in me couldn't resist. From up there I could shoot the whole floor spread out below, snow pooling in the factory's sunken pit like a white wound. So I climbed the ladder, boots clanging against rungs iced over with frost. My breath fogged the air as I stepped onto the walkway. It creaked under my weight, but seemed stable enough. I moved slowly, flashlight beams swaying across blackened walls and machinery hulks. When I reached the center, below me was the pit, a massive basin filled with snow, drifting in soft, white layers. I figured it must have once held water for cooling chemicals or for processing. Now, it was just a snow-covered grave at the bottom of a dead factory. So I set up my tripod, careful with each movement, and framed the shot. I leaned against the railing for balance as I adjusted the exposure. And then, there was no warning for something like that. No wobble, no groan. Just a snap. A deafening metallic crack. And the world dropped out from under me. If you've never fallen without anticipation, it is impossible to describe. It's not like tripping, or like slipping on ice, or like when you know you're going to drop in a roller coaster. Oh no, my friend. This is instant and violent. Your body locks in a reflex older than time, muscles seizing in a futile attempt to stop what's already inevitable. I didn't even scream, it happened that fast. My lungs seized shut as my stomach lurched into my throat. The flashlight went spinning, lights streaking in wild patterns against the ceiling, and I hit the snow. For a fraction of a second it cushioned me, tricking my brain thinking it was all over, but the weight of my body punched through the crust, and suddenly I was underwater. The shock wasn't just cold. It was devastating. My chest locked. My heart seemed to stutter, and my thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. Every nerve screamed at once. The water was so dark I couldn't tell up from down. My arms flailed against jagged ice edges. My boots kicked against the basin floor, then slipped. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how people die in places like this. But some survival instinct kicked in. My hand smacked something rough, vertical and metallic. The ladder, half rotted and rusted but solid enough, attached to the inside of this giant vat. I latched onto it. My muscles barely obeyed, each movement slow and clumsy, but I forced myself up. My head smashed against ice and panic surged. I punched, clawed, and shoved with everything I had. The ice gave way in chunks, scraping my face and shredding my gloves. Then air. My head broke through, and I sucked in the sharpest, coldest breath of my life. Snow scraped my chest as I dragged myself out, collapsing face first into the open air. I wanted to lie there forever, but the wind cut across my soaked clothes and reminded me that if I stayed still, I would die. So I stumbled to my feet, every joint screaming, and started running. My boots pounded across the concrete, slipped on ice. My flashlight was gone, as was my camera, but none of that mattered. All I cared about was moving. My body felt heavy, clumsy, wrapped in a second skin of freezing death. My teeth clattered so hard I thought they'd break, and my breath came in ragged gasps that sounded foreign in the hollow space. I ran through the factory maze, barely remembering which way I'd come in the semi-darkness. I bounced off rusted beams, slammed into walks, cursed the corridor dead ends, and somehow I found the broken side door. Outside, the night air was even colder, but it was freedom. I sprinted across the snow to my truck, wrenched the door open with numb hands and threw myself inside. I turned it on and stripped everything off until I was down to my wet underwear, my skin burnt red and raw. The heater on max, and I shook so violently I thought my bones would snap out my body. I don't know how long I sat there, watching the steam rise from my skin before I felt warm enough to drive. I left everything behind, my flashlight, tripod, camera. They're still down there somewhere in that frozen wasteland, probably buried in the water. I never went back to check. I don't think I ever could. A shame, really. Those shots were fantastic. Urban exploration, guys, is dangerous. But it wasn't graffiti artists or collapsing ceiling or even security. It's thinking that you're invincible, at least in my case, and that nothing bad is going to happen to you. I think one thing I forget is that things are normally abandoned for a reason. And this factory, as it turned out, was abandoned due to safety concerns. Goes to show. I did share my experience, let everyone know that I nearly perished on the catwalk, and advised people to not use it again. I mean, the middle part was collapsed, so they wouldn't be able to use it to get to the other side anymore, but that's besides the point. The vat only happened to be over that specific part, and if it had broken on any other part I would have plunged to my death, broken multiple bones, and had I not died on impact, I don't think I would have managed to crawl myself out. I got really lucky, and that's the only reason I can share this with you now. Be careful when urban exploring. I was exploring an abandoned train station in Cleveland with a few friends. The place is massive, soaring ceilings with chunks of plaster missing, broken glass crunching underfoot, rusted out benches and graffiti covering nearly every surface. The air had that stale smell of mold. We had brought some joints along and figured we'd smoke a bit while checking the place out. The setting was perfect, spooky quiet, and completely cut off from the outside world. We were maybe halfway through, wandering past a row of ticket booths and cracked marble floors, when this guy just appeared out of nowhere. He looked rough, dirty clothes, eyes darting around. At first, he started asking us in this weird sing-songy voice, "Where's the party at? Where's the weed at? Where's the money at?" That last one made my stomach drop. Then he pulled a gun from his waistband, racked it, and without hesitation, started firing not at us but above our heads. The sound in that cavernous, empty station was deafening. Dust and chunks of ceiling rained down while we scrambled. Honestly, we would have handed everything over if he demanded it calmly, but the second the shots rang out, instinct took over. In hindsight, it's pretty clear he was trying to scare us and not actually kill us. But in the moment, it felt like we were seconds away from dying in that abandoned station. We bolted. I've never run so fast in my life. I'm a pretty big dude. Back then I could definitely stand to lose some pounds, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. There was this 12-foot chain link fence on the way out, and I swear to God I scaled it like I was Jesse Owens being chased by a pack of wolves. My friends later said they'd never seen me move like that before or since. We didn't stop running until we were blocks away, lungs burning, ears still ringing from the gunshots. Urbex is supposed to be about creepy buildings and ghost stories, but that night it reminded me that the scariest thing you can run into isn't a phantom or the place itself, it's other people. I've been an urban explorer for years, Some people get their thrills by climbing mountains or jumping out of planes. But me? I've always been drawn to the decay of abandoned places, whether it be a school, a factory, or hospital. I just find it fascinating how a place that was teeming with life suddenly becomes a husk of its flawless self, left to decay and ruin, and the process it goes through in its abandonment. This story happened in Finland a few winters ago. I live out in the countryside, and we've got no shortage of derelict places, old barns collapsing in fields, houses swallowed by trees, and the occasional Soviet-era factory. But the strangest place I've ever set foot in was an abandoned mental hospital that had now been consumed by woods. It wasn't the dead of winter yet. The temperature had lowered to around -5, cold but tolerable. The ground was frozen, with the first thin crust of snow covering the forest floor. I remember the air that night was sharp. I read about the hospital on a forum. People talked about it casually and dismissive. A few mentioned broken windows, graffiti, and some kids that had partied on the upper floor a few times. But there was something that someone wrote that stood out to me. If you get to the basement, don't stop in the dark stretch of the corridor. Just keep walking. Just an ominous statement with no clear explanation. I found it fascinating. The road leading there was a little more than a track, overgrown and rutted, but my old hatchback managed just fine. I parked and cut the engine, and I was sort of surprised that there was no security or anyone watching over the place. I could hear the sound of traffic far, far away. The building itself was massive, a blocky grey structure rising above the tree line, its flat roof sagging under decades of frost and thaw. The windows were black and empty, rows of hollow sockets staring out over the snow. I hesitated at the entrance a bit longer than usual. It's not like me. I usually just go in. I knew the place must be empty because there wasn't a car or bike anywhere near here, and it's not somewhere you can just arrive at on foot. Something about the place though made me second guess myself. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe the fact that it looked like it could collapse in on itself at any moment. Eventually though, curiosity won out, and I pulled my flashlight from my coat pocket and stepped inside. The smell was the first thing that hit me. Rust. Mold. The flashlight beam cut across peeling paint and sagging ceiling tiles, with broken furniture scattered like old bones. I wandered through what must have been offices or day rooms, old paperwork still littering the floor, some of it frozen into clumps by moisture. Graffiti covered nearly every wall, crude drawings, names, dates. Someone had painted Demoni in thick red letters that had dripped down the plaster like blood. About half hour of wandering later, I found the stairwell that led down. The air grew colder as I descended, my boots crunching against ice where water had leaked and frozen solid. My flashlight caught frost blooming across the walls. The basement was laid out in one long corridor, running the entire length of the building. At either end, high windows let in faint moonlight reflecting off the snow outside, so the far sections glowed with a weak silver haze. But the center was pure black, like someone had painted a wide belt of shadow across the hall. Rooms opened off either side, laundry rooms, storage areas, maintenance closets. Some still had rusted beds and metal cabinets bolted to the floor. I walked slowly, listening to the hollow echo of my boots. The air was damp down there, heavy and close, smelling faintly of earth and rot. I don't scare easily, but I'll admit, I didn't like the stench of darkness in the middle. It was too absolute. My flashlight should have been enough to cut it, but somehow it seemed to get swallowed, the beam thinning as if the darkness itself were thicker there, but I kept walking. I stepped into one of the pitch-black rooms just off the center stretch, clicked my flashlight and froze. I was standing directly in front of a wall of body storage freezers. Rust streaked the metal doors, and several hung slightly open, revealing nothing but shadow inside. The handles were thick and industrial, meant to hold fast against time. It took a second for my brain to catch up, but of course it made sense. A hospital this size would need a morgue. Still, to find it here, in one spot with no windows and no natural light at all, felt wrong. The room was colder than the rest of the basement. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight, and I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I stepped further inside, and that's when I heard it. A whisper. Not a word at first, just the unmistakable cadence of breath pushing through vocal cords, soft, as if someone stood directly behind me. As you can imagine, in that frozen wasteland of a building, I froze, fear erupting through my body, and I turned my head, but the light only revealed peeling paint and a rusting door. That's when I heard it again, but this time clearer. Simon. It was my name. It didn't shout. It wasn't even spoken normally. It was like a whisper, a secret passed between two people huddled close together. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I swung the flashlight wildly around the room, but there was nothing. My brain scrambled for explanations. A trick of my own breathing? Maybe some squatter messing with me. But the whisper had been so close. But that's when I realized it hadn't come from behind me at all. It must have come from one of the freezers. I don't know how long I stood there paralyzed, but my body screamed at me to run. And run I did. I backed out of the room so fast I nearly tripped on the doorway lip. Out in the corridor again, the air felt different. Still damp but somehow charged. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I lingered, I'd hear the voice again. I forced myself to run through the corridors, boots echoing like gunshots. The silver glow of the stairwell windows ahead was the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. When I reached the ground floor and finally stepped back outside, the cold night air hit me like a blessing. 5 degrees had never felt so crisp and pure. I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, staring up at the dark hospital windows, where nothing moved. No lights, no figures, not anything. Was it all in my head? I started to doubt myself, but I know what I saw, at least I think I do, deep down. I drove home in a daze, and that night when I finally collapsed in my bed, I dreamt I was back in the morgue. The freezers stood open, and there was something inside them shifting just out of sight. I woke with my own name still ringing in my ears. It's been years since that night. But sometimes when the snow falls in a very specific way, I'll still remember my name being called in that room. I used to do a lot of solo urban exploration, mostly old factories and storage facilities. I liked the strange sense of stepping into places that weren't meant to be seen anymore. One place I went to was an old abandoned industrial complex that had partially collapsed. The main floors were nothing special, a collection of graffiti, broken windows and rusted machinery. But I found a hidden section that was harder to access. There was a narrow opening that led into a concrete passage, like someone had been chipping away at the structure over time. It wasn't natural decay, it had been carved out. I squeezed through and found myself in this small chamber that looked lived in, like someone had been using it as a home. A chair, a little table, some personal stuff stacked neatly. The air was stale, but there was this unsettling sense of order to it, like it wasn't just a squat, but a place someone cared about. And that's when I noticed a sharp-looking man in a button-up shirt and glasses, sitting on the chair perfectly still staring at me. I don't know how I didn't see him right away. I was halfway across the room before it hit me that I wasn't alone. He didn't say anything, didn't move, didn't even look surprised. Just stared right at me like I'd walked into his office instead of some abandoned space. My instincts screamed not to acknowledge him, so I kept my head down and walked straight through without making eye contact, and left as calmly as I could manage. The second I was back in the open, my legs nearly gave out. I never returned, and I haven't done any solo explanations since. Sometimes I think about how put together he looked, how deliberate that hidden space was. It wasn't just a random squatter, he wanted to be there, and he wanted it to be hard to find. I wonder how many other places like that exist. Homes carved into forgotten corners of buildings. Makes you think. My friend and I were with a couple of girls back in the day in our late teens. We were driving around in the middle of nowhere, bored, and decided to drive to a nearby mountain and see the sights, hoping to get some action after a joint or two. We came upon this old dirt road that came out into a large open area going up the side of a mountain. There was a random gate with a simple latch, and from there you could see an old train depot about halfway up the open area. The area was in the absolute middle of nowhere that had a lot of history and logging, which the train would have been primarily used to transport lumber and workers. Depot may not be the right word, as no trains were parked there, but it was a decent-sized building with a small booth out front that still had the rusted levers and mechanisms to switch tracks. So the girls start saying that we should go in and explore the main building, obviously teasing us to see if we'd chicken out, as it honestly looked pretty dilapidated and ominous. But in the spirit of teenage hormones and insecurity, we opened the gate and drove onward, and after exploring the booth and the perimeter, we went in. At first it was completely empty, nothing too crazy, but it was definitely eerie. I'm desperately trying to ignore the weed stoking my paranoia of suddenly running into another person way out there. Half for my own sanity, and half because the girl was practically on my hip, who I could tell was visibly uncomfortable but trying to play it off. Her friend was laughing and doing the whole boo to scare the rest of us. We get to an area that was once probably a kitchen, and see a door that we can only surmise as some kind of basement. We open it slowly. We never made it down. Up to pretty much the first 3 steps is just still water from years of mountain snowmelt. Maybe they were busted pipes that had run long before being shut off many decades ago. All I knew is that the water looked repulsive and smelled worse. The floorboards, feeling somewhat soft, suddenly made a lot more sense than just age. I'm immediately envisioning us falling through the floor and getting dunked into a soup a century in the making. But in the hubris of youth, we keep going upstairs. It was just a long hallway with a window on the end and 2 doors on each side. The light from the window made the doorway seem like black holes. but that may have been the fact that my entire mind is just begging to get this over with and get the hell out of there. But we hadn't found anywhere near the worst of it. The first 3 rooms are nothing but cobwebs and dust. But the fourth? 2 dirty mattresses that weren't new, but too new for this place side by side. Dark stains on them, no sheets. 2 backpacks, one that was just empty of junk all over the floor. But on the mattress, and off to the side were multiple pairs of women's panties with blood on them. What got me is they were different sizes, and there were fresh food wrappers too. My gut sank, and I genuinely began to tremble. The other backpack had a more masculine look to it, and had some clothes visible in the main compartment. My senses immediately flooded with dread, and the feeling of something really bad happening here, and to get out now. I looked at the girl I was with and she was crying silently beside me. My friend and his girl were dead silent, eyes wide. They'd been goofing off the entire time, and you could hear a pin drop. We are wordless, and listening to see if whoever was responsible was moving in the building. What felt like an eternity passed until I finally snapped out of the panic. The sun was setting. D, we gotta move. Don't run downstairs. We'll probably go through it. I don't think I'd seen him drive faster, which is saying something. He didn't touch the brakes until we were a good few miles away and back in town. None of us spoke for a while. We went about the night, paired off to our own place, and outside of one conversation I had with Dee about it years later, none of us mentioned it again. Just sharing this memory absolutely terrified me. Me and my younger brother, along with 4 of his friends, decided to explore an old rehabilitation center, long abandoned, nestled deep in the rural woods on tribal land. I'd been inside a handful of times before, so I was starting to feel comfortable navigating the floors. But there was always that creeping feeling you get when you're in a place like this. It's been untouched for over a decade. We moved through the lobby and main floor with confidence, joking around like we usually do. But as soon as we hit the 2nd floor, something changed. The air grew thick, humid, and smelled awful, like mold mixed with rot. Our stomach turned, and an uneasy weight settled in our guts. None of us had felt anything like it before. We split up into pairs, moving cautiously down the hallways as adrenaline pumped through us. Then we found it, a locker-style shower room. I'd been here before, and it was always empty, sterile, in its own decaying way. This time it wasn't. Every shower drain had a bird shoved head down in it. Some were fresh, some nothing but skeletons. Around each drain, someone had painted a perfect black circle. It was meticulous and ritualistic and utterly disgusting. A few of the fresh birds were already crawling with ants, and the stench hit us immediately. We didn't linger. Every hair on my body was standing on end. We left fast, hearts pounding, the feeling of nausea still clinging to us. I went back once, months later, curiosity getting the better of me. The paint was still there, black as ever, but no new birds had been added. Whoever or whatever had done it wasn't there anymore, and even now just thinking about it makes my skin crawl. I explore abandoned buildings a lot. Old schools, mills, hospitals, mainly to photograph them. I'm not hunting ghosts, just looking for an interesting light and the strange poetry of places left to rot. That said, after a lifetime of odd little things, I don't get freaked out easily. Weird stuff tends to happen around me, whether I want it to or not. A few summers ago, I met a couple of people from an urbex group online that lived nearby. We clicked immediately and decided to hit an old TB sanatorium that's been sitting on the edge of town for decades. The place has an unusual reputation. People talk about hauntings and misfortune, and when you stand under the eaves and look at the row of empty windows, you can see why. The building is brutal and beautiful at the same time. Long, low brick wings, a cracked tile roof, and wide porches where patients once sat in the sun. Vines were already climbing the stairwell when I walked in. That day, the air was thick and still. It was an oppressively humid summer afternoon, where even the dust seems to hang. Inside, plaster peeled in long curls, and everything smelled of stale air, mildew, and old disinfectant. Light came in through broken windows in soft, slanting sheets. My flashlight carved a narrow route through the gloom. We split up to cover more ground, the three of us calling to each other now and then, like explorers in a cave. I was working a hallway on one side of the second floor when I found a door that wouldn't budge. The old knob was corroded and the jamb had swollen with moisture, but curiosity got the better of me. I gave it a few hard kicks, and on the third impact the door popped open and swung inward with a thin, complaining creak. It was a small bathroom with a cracked basin, rusted towel hook, and a single broken mirror. Nothing special. I stepped back out and turned away to check the doorway across the hall. And that's when the door slammed behind me. The sound was just a single heavy bang at first, like someone had knocked a board down. I jumped, heart kicking, and thumbed my flashlight up, scanning over the tile. The door was closed. I made a joke under my breath, assuming one of the others was screwing with me. Then it slammed again, and again, back and forth, open, slam, open, slam. The metal latch caught each time, so it didn't sound like wind. There wasn't any wind. It was hot and humid. And I stood there watching, laughing a little to keep the panic from settling in. After a minute, the slamming stopped. My friends appeared around the corner, eyes wide, and one of them said, "Cut it out, security's gonna hear us." I told them I knew it was them and to stop being arses. They swore, confused and a little frightened. They hadn't moved from where I'd last seen them. I walked back to the bathroom, kicked the swollen door open, and it swung inwards on its rusting hinges, and checked inside. But it was empty. There were no footprints in the dust, no shoes left behind. There was no way anyone could have come in or out without me seeing. We all stood in the hallway for a moment, and the three of us suddenly very aware of the building's silence, the way our small noises seemed to echo forever. I still don't have a rational explanation for the door. I don't like to jump to ghost, but the experience felt deliberate. A little later we were poking through an administrative wing filing cabinet, a nurse's station filled with faded nameplates, cardboard boxes of old side trays, and spindles of microfilm. The light through the shattered windows turned dust motes into slow galaxies. And then we found the canisters. They were old black metal ones, not the kind that are used for tools, but the ones used in hospitals for specimens and archives. When we pried one open, the smell hit us. A chemical tang, a cold metallic hint of preservatives. Insides were slides with jars and trays, things that had once belonged in a lab. The items were clinical, and that's what made them worse. The tiny glass slides with labels in hand-scrawled ink, a sealed jar with something beige suspended in amber liquid, trays of tissue samples catalogued and forgotten. A local news report I later found confirmed years before human remains had been discovered on the property. Tragic, careless things left without ceremony. The canisters told a different story. The place had chosen to keep, to study, and dissect until someone decided it couldn't be trusted anymore. We debated what to do, call someone, leave it alone, take pictures, but in the end we took a few photos, closed the lid back on the canister and moved on. We didn't report it that day. The place was under the watch of a security company that already had a trespassers pay attitude, and we weren't ready to make that awkward phone call. There are few people in corners of the city that get labelled as dangerous because of addiction or poverty. I've been around those neighbourhoods too. The drug users and homeless people I've met while exploring are mostly kind, wary people trying to survive. I always try to be clear about what I'm doing. Say I'm an explorer and not there to cause trouble. And 9 times out of 10, we both leave with a new story. I've only ever felt threatened once. Otherwise, people have been surprisingly generous. That TB hospital sits with its secrets intact. Sometimes when I drive past it on a different route, the windows look like dark eyes. Strange things happen when old buildings are left to themselves. I didn't get my driver's license until I was 18, but my friend Gary got his. Now, we lived in a pretty small town in North Carolina. It's the kind of town where all the high school kids, me included, hung out in the Walmart parking lot, as there was nothing better to do. So me and Gary had been friends since the beginning of high school. Met in one of our classes freshman year. Gary was into the spooky stuff, and so was I. Not long after getting his license, he comes to me with an idea. He tells me about some apparently old, abandoned insane asylum a few towns over. Says it's back in the woods somewhere and isn't even visible from the roads anymore. He wants us to go out there in the middle of the night and check it out, because it's supposed to be haunted by the patients that perish there. Of course, no one wants to go with him but me. So the following weekend, we decide we're going to sneak out and check this place out. It finally takes us a while to get there and figure out where exactly this place is. Finally, we find the place where we can park the car and follow the trail up to the asylum. We arrive at an old building. Not sure if it was actually an asylum or just some building. It's possible a sign for the place was somewhere in the brush. We walked into the building where there was no door. The inside was covered in graffiti, all kinds of stuff. Some kind of funny, some kind of disturbing. The place definitely felt and looked spooky, but we didn't end up staying long. We had been inside maybe 10 minutes or so, exploring the few rooms near the front of the building. Then a loud bang goes off. Not a gunshot bang, but like something really heavy fell to the floor. Gary and I freeze. We turn to look at the doorway of the room, where the noise came from the end of the hallway. A wheelchair slowly rolled into view from the room. In this wheelchair is an old doll. If you know what a Raggedy Ann doll is, then picture that. Well, that was enough for me and Gary, and we decided to head back to the car. We're walking back to the car through the trail, both obviously scared, but neither of us want to show or admit it. As we're walking, we hear something move around the woods. Me and Gary don't speak a word to each other or even look at each other, but both immediately take off running. Whatever it was heard us and began giving chase. We could hear it running through the woods. Luckily, we made it back to the car and took off, and never looked back. For all we know, it might have just been some animal. Looking back at this now, I'm not sure what's scarier. The fact that we weren't out there alone, or that we might have run into a spirit. The most disturbing place I've ever set foot in was an abandoned medical school. Most of the classrooms and lecture halls were stripped bare, just dust, desks, and broken projectors. The air was heavy with mildew, but also a sharper, chemical, preservative-like smell clinging to the walls. In the basement, I found long corridors lined with small, windowless rooms. The stairwell at either end let in faint light, but the center of the hall was a band of total darkness. I worked my way down with my flashlight, checking rooms filled with rusted lab tables, overturned stools, and smashed glass jars. Then I opened one door that had no light at all. The beam of my flashlight swept across metal row after row of stainless steel storage doors. I'd found the morgue. One of them was already slightly open. Against every ounce of my better judgment, I pulled it. And the smell hit before the sight. A thick, sweet chemical rot that punched me in the throat. My stomach flipped instantly. When I forced the light inside, I froze. Inside the tray wasn't an intact body, but the remains from dissections. A half-collapsed cadaver lay open, its chest cavity sawn apart, ribs splayed like broken shutters. The torso was filled with hardened dark fluid, pooled preservatives mixed with whatever had leaked from the organs decades ago. The head was still attached, scalp peeled back from an old autopsy cut. Clumps of hair stuck in places like tar. The face was gone, just the hollow sockets of a skull with scraps of waxy flesh clinging in strips. But what made me stagger back was that it wasn't just one body. Stuffed into the same tray were multiple cadaver parts, arms stacked like firewood, a leg folded unnaturally, what looked like the remains of a fetus floating in a cloudy jar that had leaked and fused to the bottom of the compartment. The sight was grotesque, careless, as if students had just tossed leftovers into the freezer at the end of a semester. And that's when I saw the floor. A thick, dark puddle had spread from beneath the freezer, sticky with years of spillage. The concrete was stained, and there were old drag marks leading to a drain in the center of the room. My brain put it together in an instant. They dumped fluids, tissue, and God knows what straight into the basement floor. That was the moment I bolted, because I now knew the awful truth of how human remains were treated and abandoned when no one was watching in this place. There used to be an old market in the neighborhood where I grew up. It was a large building where local farmers and vendors sold everything, from produce to handmade goods. It had been abandoned for around 20 years, the stores were empty, the roof sagging in places, and squatters had dragged in old filthy couches and mattresses. We used to go there pretty often. It was easy to get to, completely secluded by overgrown weeds and a chain-link fence, far from the nearest occupied building. We joked that nobody could hear you scream. New explorers came with us sometimes because it was so easy to sneak in and out of, hidden but creepy. We'd check on the place every month or so. The last time we went, there was a backpack sitting on one of the couches that hadn't been there before. It was bulging with something heavy, and curiosity got the better of us and we opened it. Inside was a terrifying mix of items: drug paraphernalia, needles, baggies, spoons, and cotton. An assortment of restraints, gags, and various other adult toys. But there were also small clothes, clearly for children. My stomach twisted at the thought of what this meant. Before I could process it, I heard heavy, deliberate footsteps nearby. A shadow moved in the doorway. A man, scruffy, wide-eyed and clearly unstable. He didn't hesitate. He drew a knife and lunged at us. We froze for a moment, then ran. The place was full of debris, and he was gaining on us fast. I can't even describe the chaos. Couches overturned, glass shattered, weeds whipping our face as we sprinted through the overgrown lot. At one point, I tripped and fell. My friend grabbed my arm and yanked me up, just as the man swung at us. Somehow we made it to the edge of the property, scrambled into the darkness, and didn't stop running until we reached the main road. We called the police immediately, but they said he was likely gone by the time they arrived. Nothing ever came of it, no arrests, no explanations. Just the memory of that. And now, years later, I still can't go anywhere near that place. I was wandering down an alley behind an old set of warehouses, just past the main street, with my dog, when I stumbled upon a tiny, forgotten courtyard squeezed between two crumbling buildings. There was a small, grimy pool of water collecting in a corner, probably from a broken pipe, and my dog jumped in. I stood at the edge watching him splash around when something caught my eye. At first I thought it was trash scattered across the concrete, but the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't trash at all, but shiny objects. As I approached, getting ever clearer, I tripped on a puddle and landed in it. That's when I felt the sting of needles penetrating my skin. There were hundreds of them, sticking out of the weeds and cracked concrete, hidden well enough. I shrieked. My dog came running back, and I told him to go around. I managed to get the needles out of my arm and made my way quickly to A&E. They did a few checks, and after a few weeks, it was concluded that nothing had entered my system, thankfully. But it remains one of the most disturbing encounters of my life, as landing in a heap of needles is an almost surefire way to get any number of diseases. For weeks I could barely sleep, waiting for them to tell me I was HIV positive or some other nefarious disease that was going to end my life quickly. I'm still grateful that that never happened, but be careful out there. I first stumbled upon the abandoned paper mill 2 decades ago. It was so colossal, so vast, that it had its own train station, winding streets with intersections, and even a lab. The eerie silence was broken by the distant hum of the wind through broken windows and the occasional creak of rusted metal. As we ventured deep into the complex, the most unsettling discovery awaited us. The workers had vanished, their belongings left behind as if they'd simply evaporated. Locker rooms still held boots, lined up side by side, clothing draped over benches, and personal items scattered about. Desks in the offices were cluttered with papers and pens, and the lab remained eerily intact. One of the most chilling finds was the refrigerator in the break room. Inside we found milk that had expired 30 years ago, as well as other food items, many of which had turned to dust. Our initial concern was exposure to some form of chemical contamination. The sudden abandonment of the untouched belongings and the eerie stillness all pointed to something amiss. But as we delved deeper into the history of the site, we uncovered a far more terrifying reality. The factory had been a front for illicit activities. Unknown to the worker, the factory had been handling and processing hazardous materials, including radioactive substances. The sudden disappearance of the workforce was not due to a mass exodus or a natural disaster, but the result of a catastrophic radiological event. Radiation had silently seeped into every corner of the factory. The untouched food in the refrigerator, a testament to their abrupt departure because of their health deterioration. The factory was sealed off and the records erased. There were no official reports, no environmental studies, no trace of the incident remained to find. The site was eventually demolished, and any remnants of its existence were wiped from public memory with it. When urban exploring, be careful where you lurk into. Back when I was in college, I used to kill time by exploring abandoned spots around my area. Old barns, forgotten houses, stuff like that. Most of the time it was just junk and graffiti, sometimes wildlife. One weekend a friend told me about an old service station out along a rural highway that had been shut down since the 80s. The pumps were long gone, and the building had half collapsed, but there was still a detached storage shed out back, standing almost perfectly intact, and I figured I'd check it out. The shed looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Weathered wood, padlock busted off, and weeds growing up the sides. I pushed the door open, expecting to find tools or maybe car parts, but instead the place was almost empty. Just dust, cobwebs, and one white refrigerator sitting against the wall. It was plugged in. That immediately set me on edge. Why would a working fridge be out here in a building no one used? I walked closer, and the hum of the motor was the only sound in the whole place. The handle was grimy, but curiosity won over. Inside were clear plastic bags with severed heads of animals, vacuum sealed. Bits of blood could be seen at the bottom of the bag. It was one of the most horrific things I'd ever seen, especially as on the top there was the head of a small dog. I wanted to cry. I wanted to run. I didn't touch anything, and I thought about calling the police, but what would they do? In the end, I decided to do just that. They investigated the place and sealed it off, but they never gave me any follow-up. So I don't really know what the outcome of that was, if they ever found the sicko who did it. Last year, a friend and I were exploring Chateau Lucifer somewhere in France. A farmer who lives nearby keeps an eye on the place. He is known to test the windows and doors to check if someone's entered. We were told to close the door exactly as we found it when we visited, to not alert him. We made a round, check every possible entry, and everything's locked up, tightly barricaded with wood or screwed shut. We climbed on the veranda, as the front gate to it is closed with a chain lock, and slipped through the front door, the only door not barricaded. Luckily it went smoothly, and we closed it behind us, exactly as we found it. We're in the hallway as we sneak into the first room, and we see the castle floors are made of wood, and every step we take feels loud. Better to try and walk as much as possible on the carpets. I start to see more books and hope we're getting close to the library, which is the main reason I want to visit. I notice a buzzing sound in one of the rooms upstairs. Weird, one of the windows is covered in flies, but I don't see any dead animals. We check all the rooms on the second floor before moving to the third, and every time we pass a window, we check if there's a guard in sight. Walking around makes noise, and moving next to a window can attract unwanted attention. I'm focused on the sound I make, and try and keep it to a minimum. As I hear my hand sliding over the guardrail on the stairs, it's impossible to move around without making noise. We decide to go right, and as we walk through the corridor we hear a door pushed open, scraping over the floor. My friend and I give each other a startled look. That very instant I open the built-in closet that we happen to be next to and step inside. My shoulder hits metal coat hangers and they jingle happily. We close the door of our closet quickly and try to make the hangers stop moving as quickly and quietly as possible. And for a moment, we hear nothing. There's no noise coming from anywhere in the building. It doesn't sound like it's on our floor, but someone definitely came in. Someone is scurrying through the building, and I'm trying to picture what they're doing. And then it starts to get weird. The doors inside the building are opened or closed. No one is walking through the building checking the place out. We do hear movement sometimes, but it's mostly floorboards that are squeaking, as if someone is waiting, shifting their weight from one hip to the other. Sometimes I think about hearing a walking frame. They make a distinct click. The sounds are coming closer, and they seem to have moved to our floor. It's coming from the staircase, I think. It's the only staircase we've seen, the only way out, and whoever it is seems to be waiting there. Time goes by, and sometimes I can hear someone flip through the pages of a book. I think it's just one person. Then I think I hear them, not more than a few meters from us. I think it's good to point out that we're both sniffy as hell. We've been coughing and sneezing all week, and it's a miracle none of us have sneezed. We have a really hard time not to breathe loudly. I had some time contemplating this hiding in the closet, and then it hit me. Whoever it is didn't cough or make another audible sound since they came in. No shouts, no clearing of throats, no clicking of cameras. My friend tries to communicate by looks alone, as the both of us can't move without disturbing the coat hangers or accidentally pushing the closet door open. I do understand what he's trying to say though. We're in there for more than an hour. Whoever they are close. We hear someone's hand sliding the guardrail for a short moment. I expect him to walk by our door at any moment. I expect him to do that for the last 15 minutes. We can both see a little through the crack, but he must just be out of our line of sight. What the hell is that guy doing? Doesn't he have anything better to do? The noise seems to move back to the staircase. For another half an hour we wait. Then, we decide to make a run for it. We hear movement again scarily close, but we're both absolutely sure that if we run, we'll run straight into him, so we better be fast. As we push the door open, we look back, but the hallway is empty. There's no one at the stairs, there's no shouts, no other footsteps breaking into a run. We fly down the stairs, cross the hallway, and find the front door exactly as we left it. I yank it open and it widens without a sound. I jump over the balcony rail, land in the bushes and start running again. Only when we're back on the street do we dare look back and begin to laugh. In the car we talk about it, and we can't figure some stuff out. We hear the door squeak, but the only entrance we didn't open. We heard the movement and the other noises at the same time. I interpreted the noise as the walking frame, my friend as a metal clicky stick. I think I heard someone flipping pages of a book, but we couldn't figure out how we heard all those noises and no one be there. I think it must have been a ghost messing with us. I've been into urbex for years now and thought I'd seen it all. But there was this old psychiatric hospital that was shut down during World War II. Most of the upper floors were your standard urbex stuff, peeling paint, old charts scattered around, beds stripped bare. Creepy, yeah, but nothing out of the unusual. And that's when I found the basement. At the end of the corridor were a handful of tiny cells. One of them had "Help Me" written in huge letters across the wall above the door. Not spray paint. It looked carved and then smeared over, like whoever did it was bleeding when they made it. But inside was worse. The walls were covered in scratches, names etched in over each, like other people were fighting for space just to be remembered. There were leather straps still bolted to the floor and wall, cracked, but clearly used to hold people down. The walls had dark rings burnt into them, like something hot had been pressed against the skin. The floor was stained in a way I don't even want to guess, but the creepiest detail? A bunch of tallies scratched into the paint, someone marking the days until they just stopped. I was filming when I noticed a Polaroid tucked in a crack near the cot. Thought it'd be something old, but the picture was of the exact same cell and same angle as me standing in the doorway, and the date from a week ago written at the bottom. When I left, I noticed fresh scratch marks inside the feed slot of the door. Not old, not rusted, bright raw scratches, and next to them, in the same shaky handwriting, the words "help me." I left. As I was walking out, I could swear I heard someone exhale around the corner. I can't say for sure, because I bolted the hell out of there, and I don't ever want to return. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. So let's talk about yesterday. Right, well, I was going to record this video yesterday, but unfortunately my wife was very unwell and I had to take her to the hospital. And even though I thought it would be a quick visit, we were there all day nearly, well, all morning, and, well, anyway, the whole time basically the kids were in school, we were there. And by the time we left, we had to go get them, so recording them became impossible. I did try doing it in the evening, but my youngest refused to sleep until 10 PM, and at that point I was just so exhausted I couldn't finish the video. So I do apologise to Tabitha mostly, and to everyone else listening if you're expecting this yesterday. Hopefully I'll be able to get back on schedule for Tuesday or Wednesday. But that's it from me. I apologise again, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. And if you enjoy this kind of content, interact with it for YouTube to promote it more to you. But that's it from me, guys. Thank you so much for everything, and I'll see you in the next one.